Every tongue that rises against me, God will condemn. The weapon may fall, but it won't work. It won't work. Every tongue that rises against me, God will condemn. The weapon may fall, but it won't work. It won't work. Say sickness, sickness, heartache, depression, it won't work. Fear, doubt, shame, it won't work. Sickness, heartache, depression, it won't work. Fear, doubt, shame, it won't work. 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 Say it won't work. No, it won't work. It won't work. No, it won't work. The weapon may fall, but it won't work. The weapon may fall, but it won't work. Depression, no, it won't work. Said it won't work. No, it won't work. They tried to kill your spirit, but it won't work. No, it won't work. No, it won't work. The sickness tried to take it out. It won't work. Those bills, they look like they won't work. But it won't work. No, it won't work. No, it won't work. It won't work. Said the weapon that made forward, but it won't work. The weapon that's gonna forward, but it won't work. No, the name of Jesus Christ. It won't work. Hey, it won't work. It won't work. No, it won't work. It won't work. No, it won't work. It won't work. No, it won't work. No, it won't work. Said it won't work. Said it won't work. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, how wonderful it is. Jesus promised he'll take care of me. Oh, how marvelous it is.
Jesus.
Jesus promised he'll take care of me. Oh, how wonderful it is. Jesus promised he'll take care of me. Oh, how marvelous it is. Jesus promised he'll take care of me. Come on, sinners, I don't have to worry. I don't have to worry about the things ahead. In the middle of the night,
And when I call,
him, he'll make everything all right.
it does not matter.
It does not matter how big the problem may be.
My Jesus,
Jesus promised he'll take care of me. Jesus promised he'll take care of me.
I like that. Say, oh.
Oh, how wonderful it is. Jesus promised he'll take care of me.
Oh, Jesus.
Jesus promised he'll take care of me.
One more time, say it. Oh,
How wonderful it is. Jesus promised he'll take care of me.
wonderful, wonderful. Oh,
How marvelous it is.
Jesus.
Jesus promised he'll take care of me.
Ooh,
I don't have to worry about the things ahead. I don't have to worry about the things ahead. I don't have to worry about the things ahead. All I have to do is live right. 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 All I have to do is live right and believe in what he said.
I can call him in the morning.
I can call him in the morning. I can call him in the middle of the night.
And when I call,
And when I call him, he'll make everything all right.
it does not matter.
It does not matter.
Jesus promised he will take care of me. Yes, sir. I thank you all once again for being here. Thank you, Minister Ware, for putting that selection on for us. Thank you for that churchville singing. We thank them for that selection. Thank you very, very, very much. Thank you all too for joining us again, being here. And we will now go ahead and get started with our service. I have the honor and privilege, first of all, being asked to be in this position once again to serve you all. Thank you all for giving me the space to do so, giving me the space to try and be myself, giving me the space too to grow as well. I thank you for the opportunity. I also want to make sure I say publicly, because I love you, Overseer Murray. Yesterday evening, we had to handle some work with the other work, so we did not get to even see the game ourselves, so we will catch the YouTube highlights today. But I want you to know that, yes, sir, our heart was there. So, yes, sir, I thank you for all that you do for me and constantly guiding and leading me as an example. So I will go ahead and continue on with what we have next on our agenda. Our first speaker today is a very dear brother of mine and friend. And the thing that's crazy is that, like, I have so much respect for this man and really look to him as like an example and role model. And he may not fully understand that. But for me, I'm so grateful to be able to not just introduce him today, but have the honor of knowing him, because he's a constant like example manifestation of like, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. So just to have the honor to know him,
in progress,
a brother and a friend, I thank him so much just for that relationship and just for the genuine love that he shows to me and to all of us other brothers, you know, as peers. And so you were just an amazing man, sir. And I thank you for that. There's a term in Lingala. It's an African term that I've learned. My queen, she's African, and the term, sir, is Ngombe. And Ngombe means champion, you know, and so I thank God that you're an anointed champion. You know, you're not just a great man, you know, you're not a mortal man, sir. You have God super inside of you on your natural, and I'm grateful to just be tethered to you in the way, and you're going to bless us today. So you are definitely Ngombe to me and to all of us, sir. This man who I'm presenting, Langston Mims, he has a Bachelor of Science in Health Science from Howard University, his undergrad. He is a certified personal trainer. He is currently right now at Southwest Baptist University, not only getting his Master's of Business Administration, he is actively working on his Doctor of Physical Therapy degree as well. And not only is he doing all those things, he at least once a month, if not sometimes twice, sets up our guy talks and not only puts those together, sends out the flyer, you know, does advertising for all that, all those things. He teaches us, asks questions. And so just as a man of God, once again, as an example, he is doing it all. And I just thank him for leading by example and doing those things. So, you know, with no further ado, I'm going to present to some and introduce to others this great man of God and my brother, our son, a son of God, Langston Mims. It's in your hands, sir.
Oh, sorry about that. I think my connection kind of froze there a little bit, but yes, thank you. First of all, I want to just say thank you, Matthew, for the great introduction that you gave. Truly, again, I see you as a brother, man, and so again, blood couldn't make us any closer and stuff. So definitely, I really do appreciate that. But with further ado, first I want to give an honor to God, who really truly is the head of my life. I want to give an honor to all the bishops, all the overseers, all the evangelists, deacons, and all the other church members of this church congregation that are here. I truly am thankful for you guys for just joining me today as I get ready to, in some cases, unleash on you a word that I feel God has just really put on my heart to just speak to you guys. And so I'm really, truly thankful for this opportunity. Again, I couldn't be more grateful. When I was asked to give a talk, I was kind of, again, I wanted to give something meaningful and impactful, and I really wasn't sure exactly how I was going to do that, if I'm being completely honest. But, in listening to just all the talks that we've been having and just witnessing what God has been doing with our church and with the world, and just in so many different facets of life, I believe that he kind of gave me, in the heat of the moment, he inspired me to talk about something that I feel can not just apply to young people, but it can apply to people of all generations. And so, with further ado, I won't keep you guys long. I'm actually going to try to keep this brief, but I want to make sure you guys are getting everything that I'm about to tell you. The topic that I want, or I guess the title of my talk that I want to embark on you guys, is called "The Work of One's Gift Never Truly Dies. It Only Transforms." And so it's kind of a lengthy title, so bear with me. I'm going to kind of dissect it and go through this in a very efficient manner and stuff. And so, with further ado, I want to kind of highlight the fact that the scripture that has kind of been discussed, and as far as the 1 Corinthians 12 verses 4-7 and stuff, and it talks about spiritual gifts. And so, oftentimes as young people, when we think about spiritual gifts, or when we hear spiritual gifts, particularly that in the church and whatnot, a lot of times it'll go right over our heads, because we don't think in that context. It's not till usually that we get older that we oftentimes start to dissect it and realize, okay, the spiritual gift that God gives me is either this, that, or the third. Oftentimes when we think of a gift, we may think of it as a present wrapped up in the bow, maybe to give to somebody, or hopefully to receive. I think a lot of times they tell us it's better to give than receive, but I think it's kind of the reverse psychology that we often try to think of when we're younger and whatnot. But oftentimes when we think about spiritual gifts, the reality is that God has embarked on each and every one of us a spiritual gift, that whether we recognize it immediately or we recognize it much later in life, that he gives us a gift that's usually not for the sake of ourselves, but it's usually to the sake of others, to do to the servitude of others, in hopes that it can help them inspire and encourage and hopefully serve others down the line. And so, again, there is a spiritual gift that I want to inform you guys that God does give to each and every one of us. And again, whether we recognize it or not, it's there. Now how we access that is always the bigger question. And so with that comes the question, how do we discern what that gift, that spiritual gift from God is? And with that, and again, take notes if you need to, the answer that I have for you guys, pulling yourself out of the worldly equation and putting yourself into the divine equation. Now, we may ask, what is that worldly equation versus that divine equation? So for one, I want to highlight the verse of Romans 12:2, and I'm using the English Standard Version, and it says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good, and what and acceptable and perfect." And the reason I highlight that verse is because a lot of times, more so than often, we tend to find ourselves in situations where God is putting us in kind of on the fence of as far as testing our faith and seeing, are we going to conform to the ways of the world, or are we going to conform to what God says is true and is perfect to our betterment and whatnot. And oftentimes, it's, and again, I can attest to this myself. I've sometimes have chosen the latter, where I've chosen those ways where, I've conformed to the world because it seemed more easy. It seemed more feasible. It seemed more comfortable. And, sometimes I think we get comfortable in that comfort. I think as the body, as we think, when we think about our bodies, we never want to put ourselves in uncomfortable positions, because oftentimes it hurts. It's painful. There's a mental and physical pain that sometimes comes with it. But I think that sometimes God puts us in those uncomfortable situations to allow us to experience growth, and it, in some cases, allows us, our spiritual gifts, to sprout, kind of like a flower, kind of like a flower that's rooted in soil. Because in some cases, if we're not put in those uncomfortable situations, oftentimes that gift may not manifest into what God intended it to be for us and to the servitude of others. And so with that, I want to bring it back to the equation. As far as the divine equation that we should be putting ourselves into, it's a simple equation: patience plus preparation plus a readiness on seeking out God's will for our life will ultimately lead us to discovering that spiritual gift that God has set for us. And the reason I say patience plus preparation plus a readiness on seeking out God's will for our life is because oftentimes, more so than not, we live in a society right now, as young people, even as middle-aged people, and even as our elders, we live in a world that's very fast-paced, that's very eager to just get on to the next thing. We are looking for, we never really are able to digest what it is that God has set for us in that time frame, even whether it's directly or indirectly. And so patience and preparation are two big factors in that, because I'm pretty sure some of you may have heard the saying, and some of you may have not, but for those that haven't, proper preparation prevents poor performance. Again, we want to make sure that we're taking the time out to really understand what it is that God is really trying to tell us, what he's trying to set for us, whether we're a young person or an older person. But particularly for those that of our younger people, we really need to make sure that we're practicing the patience that God really wants us to see, to settle in, because it's in that patience that sometimes we can start to see the little details that God is really trying to point out to us that can ultimately help us in our readiness to receive that gift, to receive what it is that he has for us. And so with that, again, patience plus preparation plus a readiness on seeking out God's will for our life. Again, the readiness on seeking out God's will for our life, we have to be able to be ready for that. Again, I want to highlight quickly before I move on to into the worldly equation. I want to highlight the verse Matthew 25, 1-14. And it's a pretty long verse, so I won't really read for word the scripture, but that talks about the 10 virgins. It's a story that quotes the 10 virgins, how you had 5 of them that had that all of them had lamps, but you had 5 of them that carried their oil because they were preparing for the harvest to receive what it is that God had for them. And then you had 5 that didn't, that were kind of careless and reckless. And what we see here is there's this readiness that, again, they have, that these 5 that with their oil, we see that they have what they need to be prepared to receive what God is having for them, because they're taking diligent interest. They're being patient. They're being, again, back to the preparation. They're being prepared to receive what it is that God has for them, because ultimately they know that their gift, they know that putting themselves in that equation is going to ultimately lead them to receiving the gift that God has for them. But again, we see the 5 that don't have the oil because they're kind of being careless and recklessness, which leads me to the second equation, the worldly equation that so often many of us put ourselves into: anxiousness plus carelessness plus a readiness on seeking out the world's will for you in your life. And the reason I use those terms is because whether we choose to acknowledge it or not, a lot of times we find there's always a level of anxiousness that I think that a lot of times the world puts on us because it's so fast paced, because it's so eager to take us away from that divine spirit, without it, sometimes without us even recognizing it. Sometimes there's a lot of times that anxiousness tends to settle in. And with anxiousness, we tend to do things without really paying attention to the little details, without taking the time to put in the proper preparations. And because of that, that's where carelessness seeks into, because we're so focused on making sure that we're so content with what we're doing in the short term to coincide with what the world says that we should be like, versus how God is, compared to the truth that God has for us and the truth that God tells us to be patient about. And so with that, again, as far as discerning between those spiritual gifts and those and the gifts of the world, again, the answer to that I have for you guys today is pulling yourself out of the worldly equation and putting yourself into a divine equation. And I won't lie, it is not something that's easy to understand, because it's not something that's often practiced. Sometimes in this case, we have to take it step by step, pull ourselves. Again, proper preparation prevents poor performance. And how do we do that? Practice, simple practice. And so with that, just to kind of keep things moving along, I want to leave you guys with just a couple further points. The first point is your spiritual gift does not have an expiration date. And this, I want to really speak to the older generation, because again, when we think about it, oftentimes for the younger people, they tell us, we go through church, we go through life, they tell us all these great things like, oh my God, you're so tall, you're going to be this, you're going to be that. You're so gifted in writing, you're so gifted in speaking. There's so many different things that as children that we're so succumbed to, by, our older generations. And as we get older, we start to hear less and less and less of that. And it's not a bad thing, but it's ultimately, again, it's just showing the maturity and the hopefully showing the maturity and hopefully showing that, okay, it's not that we're not focusing on you, but we have to help bring up the next generation and whatnot. And so your gift doesn't have an expiration date, but ultimately, and this is where I really want to express the focal point, it ultimately transforms. Because the thing is, the reason I say it transforms is because a gift never really truly dies. When we think about the various idols and that kind of go in, that have coincide in life and whatnot. And for those, to give kind of an example, I pointed out three particular idols that I think we're probably fully aware of. First one is Magic Johnson. Obviously, I'm pretty sure for all those basketball fans that grew up in like the 80s, or that were watching basketball in the 80s and whatnot, people know Magic Johnson from Showtime, from him and Kareem and doing their thing with the Lakers and whatnot. And so we see this man, this 6'9" point guard, bring Showtime, have this gift of just bringing pizzazz to people, making people likable, making people see a different side of not just basketball, but just enjoying, entertainment and whatnot, and ultimately what we see is we see a shift in him when we move forward in life with discovering that, he has HIV, he has HIV. All of a sudden, his whole perspective, people look at him in a whole different light. But in that, he didn't face it with fear, but rather he faced that change in faith. And so from that, we see that he takes his gift of Showtime, bringing pizzazz to entertainment, bringing such attention to the entertainment industry as far as sports wise. And we see him transition that gift, that gift that God has given him, and bringing such joy with that $1 million smile. We see him shift that and bring that spirit, that gift that God has given him from entertainment, from basketball, ultimately to bringing awareness to HIV, because now we see a whole new different light with that. If for those that are unfamiliar, he brought a lot of attention to the HIV community, showing that that apart from this deadly disease, there is a way to live a life beyond that. There is a way to kind of live life, in a greater aspect, in a greater perspective than the negative perspective that's already given onto. Another example is MLK, Martin Luther King Jr. We see this great leader, again, who spoke inspiration into people, spoke so much light into different like people of generations, whether they at the time of the 60s, of the civil rights, whether you were a young person of color or an older person of color. Ultimately, from what we see about his life, it ultimately cost him it ultimately did cost him his life. But in that, what we see is this man had a gift to inspire and to encourage people through his talking, through his leading by example and whatnot. And that dream that he had, that he spoke to millions of people on Capitol Hill in DC, we see that even though his life had to end in 68 and stuff, even though his life had to end, if anything, that dream only inspired onward. And what we see is that spiritual gift of him inspiring just took on a whole different form. It transformed not just from a physical aspect of him speaking, but onto a mental aspect of how he inspired leaders down the line. Leaders to this day are still kind of building off of the blueprint that he set before them. And so again, your gift doesn't have an expiration date. Ultimately, it transforms. And from that transformation, I tell you, don't approach that transformation of your gift with fear, but rather with faith, because it's in fear that's where anxiousness sets in. And then from anxiousness, carelessness sets in. And then that's how a lot of times when we're looking and trying to discern between our spiritual gift and what the world wants from us, that's how oftentimes we can get tripped up in the world, from looking at things with, the intent of hoping to please God, to then suddenly finding yourself pleasing yourself and pleasing man, and slowly taking your eye off the ball from what is truly that God is trying to set, truly from the harvest that God is truly trying to set you in. And so moving on to my last 2 points, I want to say, even in embracing your uniqueness of your gift, because again, I believe everybody's gift, and I believe that God has designed it to everybody's gift being unique in its own facet. Even in embracing your uniqueness, we also must remember that we must do so in unity. Again, I want to highlight one more verse, which is 1 Corinthians 12, 17 through 18. That says, if the whole body were an eye, where would be the sense of hearing? If the whole body were an ear, where would be the sense of smell? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them as he chose. And so with that, we got to understand that we're like one giant puzzle, a giant puzzle that's never ending, that only he knows when that end of the puzzle is nearly complete. And so each of us is carved in a different facet, a different shape, a different style, to where, our gifts are only styled to us. But in a way, we're still all connected to one big puzzle, because ultimately we're helping out one another, each of us with our spiritual gifts, whether we recognize it or not, indirectly or directly. We're all of our gifts are connected in some facet of way. Now, we may not see it, especially when we're younger, and maybe sometimes even when we're older, but understand that the spiritual gift that God has for you is one that continues to evolve, it continues to transform, but ultimately never lose faith and never lose sight in the fact that it's helping out more people than we know, whether they've came before us or if they're coming ahead of us in generations to come that we may not see. Our gift is ultimately part of one giant body that God has established for us. And ultimately, I believe I'm here to tell you guys that the whole body, as one body, we have a duty not just to ourselves, but ultimately to God, to really put forth the effort to seek out what he has for us, because we might be surprised. There might be some things that we never thought in a million years that we could accomplish. But again, it starts with our mindset. It starts with pulling ourselves out of that worldly equation and putting ourselves into that divine equation. And so with that, I want to say this lastly. No matter what life circumstances God has you going through in your journey right now, know that God has instilled in you a great purpose in you. And with that, a great gift elevated to put you in the best position to be the best version of yourself while being of service to others and ultimately to the Lord Almighty. And so with that, again, going back, wrapping this all up, I want to say the work of one gift never truly dies. It only transforms. But it starts with each and one of us, whether we're young, whether we're old. Again, it starts with how we take that approach. And when we can set ourselves in that divine equation, the sky's the limit. And with that, that wraps up my my sermon. Again, I hope that I was able to enlighten you guys this morning, and thank you.
Amen and amen. Thank you so much, Brother Langston. You did an amazing job, sir. We thank you for that word. I know for all of us, we can take a look and make sure that we're doing our best to map out that equation, and make sure that we're following the godly equation. So thank you for that, sir. We now want to be respectful of the time and transition. Our next speaker we have for our first session today, I want to make sure I say her name respectfully, is Miss Vanessa Perosier. She will be speaking on can we be real for a minute? So we want to go ahead and give space for Miss Vanessa Perosier to come forward and go ahead and speak to us. Thank you.